Imagine a virus that strips away your ability to think, just leaves you with instinct and rage. Imagine the people who aren't infected, but then act in the exact same way, which would be more frightening. This is the question that I was left with after getting the opportunity to see 28 Days Later in cinemas in the lead up to 28 Years Later coming out, which I have seen now as a filming, and it was a big slay. Highly recommend. The film is known for revolutionising the zombie genre, despite the fact that it's technically not a zombie film. It introduced the concept of fast running zombies that will catch up to you. And more recently, it's eerie shots of an abandoned, empty London, reminiscent of the height of the COVID lockdown. So there's no better time than now, or whenever you're watching this really, to analyse this film. In particular, I'm going to analyse what I think is the true horror of this film, not the infected, but instead how the uninfected abandon long-term thinking, morality and empathy in the name of survival. 28 Days Later shows us that when people act in impulse, whether that be driven by fear, ideology or desire, they become just as monstrous as the creatures they both dehumanize and fear. The infected are the people who have caught the rage virus. They're technically not zombies, they are still alive, but they have no capacity to reflect, to reason, or to make choices. They are so full of pure unfiltered rage that they become mindless. I kind of originally thought that they chased the survivors to eat them, but I don't think that's actually the case. I think it's just to attack them, just out of that instinct of violence. And this is because they are a representation of pure rage, without reason and without purpose. At least if they ate humans and that was their only source of food, it would give them a reason to attack, as they would want to keep living. But for the infected, that's really not the case. At least in this film, the further films in this trilogy, specifically speaking about 28 Years Later, there's some developments on this, but I'm just talking about 28 Days Later, just the film itself, nothing else. In an interview, writer Alex Garland said Danny, who's the director, was particularly interested in issues that had to do with social rage, the increase of rage in our society, road rage and other things. This shows that the infected aren't supposed to represent some kind of supernatural, insane level of aggression, but instead rage that we already see in our own world. If all social expectations and barriers were just dropped and people became uncivilized, which is the word that the director uses quite a lot to describe this kind of rage. That interview was in 2003. People have definitely become even more angry now, so maybe a new film coming out now of all times is incredibly appropriately timed. We see what happens when society gets shut down and thrown into chaos. People do become incredibly aggressive and constantly angry. Although the infected are defined by their inability to reflect or resist impulse, they are not the only ones driven by instinct and emotion, as the film's very first scene with the animal rights activists makes very clear. Before I delve into this, I just want to clarify that I'm not agreeing with the scientists, and I'm definitely on the activist side. Look, I've not eaten a piece of meat since 2013. I'm clearly going to be on the activist side. I'm just analysing it in this way. Moving on. This group of animal rights activists breaks into a lab where chimpanzees are being held captive and experimented on. They are strapped down to tables and forced to watch various violent images, which somehow, I don't really understand how, but it does, infects them with something called the rage virus. The activists take various photos of this lab to expose their unethical experiments, but they also want to release the chimpanzees. Even when a scientist finds them and warns them about the infection, one of them opens the cage anyway, gets attacked, and all hell breaks loose, to put it lightly. As I said, they are technically in the right. These animals are being tortured, deserve to be free. I can't imagine this study on this virus is going to be very useful towards some kind of medical breakthrough, I don't know. But unfortunately, life isn't that black and white. The activists act purely on their morals and what they feel is right, without really thinking of the future. Even without the virus, you don't know how aggressive these chimps are going to be. Do you have anywhere to put them? Anywhere to let them live? You can't just set them free and let them run down the streets of London. Just because something feels right doesn't make it the most ethical or productive choice in that moment. Like the infected, they are blinded by instinct. In this case, their instinct is to help the chimpanzees, which causes them to do something that they certainly regret. Unlike the infected, as I said, the survivors have the ability to plan and reflect. However, this doesn't always lead to a better outcome, as I also said. It just means that if they do choose to go down an evil path, it's out of their own volition, making their actions become even more monstrous. This is clearly explored through the soldiers led by Major West. While at first, the soldiers give the group a place to stay and food to eat, and protection as well, West reveals to Jim that the radio announcement was originally intended to lure in women to and then forced to give birth to continue the human race, essentially. The soldiers aren't reacting based on instinct like everyone else in this film. They are planning ahead, but in their own image, based solely on their selfish, disgusting interests and some kind of duty of righteousness in some way.
What I kind of mean by like righteousness in a way is I think the soldiers believe because they're in this like important position of power that they deserve to be at like the top of this hierarchy in like this post-apocalyptic UK, that because they're soldiers they deserve to do what they want and have all the power, and they're taking the opportunity to seize the power that they want. There you go, that's what I mean.
This makes the soldiers far more disturbing than the infected. While the infected act without control, the soldiers fully understand what they're doing and then they do it anyway. There's only really one that disagrees and then he gets sentenced to death, which also shows how they treat people who disagree with their vision for the future. It's not good. Their ability to think and plan doesn't lead them to anything good. Instead, it gives them space and time to justify something horrific. They're not trying to survive. They're trying to build a world where they will be in control, where women are treated as objects and tools, and violence is normalized and even encouraged. In the end, they show that the most horrifying thing in this film isn't the virus, it's what people will choose to do when no one is watching them. And when usual societal expectations, societal rules, empathy is put aside. This kind of critique of the military is not something only seen in this film, but also in 28 Weeks Later, and I've now learnt also in 28 Years Later. In 28 Weeks Later specifically, it's more a critique of the US military, because even with more resources and more time, they still end up making awful choices. They kill people, they cause so much fucking destruction, and they treat people more like problems than lives to be protected. So even when things become more organized or even more advanced, it doesn't make anyone more humane. In 28 Years Later, I won't spoil it, there is also some kind of military person who treats the people of Britain, whether that be infected or non-infected, in an incredibly dehumanizing way. That's all I'll say. But these ideas are continued throughout all the films. I'll just say that. Two of the main protagonists that we follow in this film is Jim and Selena. In the beginning of the film, Selena acts quite cold and is very quick to just kill someone and leave someone behind to save herself. But unlike the infected, this quick thinking is still her own decision. She decided to act like this, to put her emotions aside and only prioritize her survival. Only her connection to Jim, and to some extent Frank and Hannah, allows her to become vulnerable once again. This shows that Selena isn't naturally callous or brutal, but instead she believes it's the only way to survive. She's not living anymore, she's just surviving. Maybe for me this is just a very pessimistic outlook, but what would be the point in continuing to survive if you don't think you can ever truly live again? The characters in this film do so much to continue to live, only to be stuck with no food and no water, and the infected still pursuing them. Maybe this proves that the only thing they're thinking about in the long term is hope, and that is it. But hope can push people to places where they start to blur the line between infected and non-infected, as we see with Jim's violent actions near the end of the film. This happens when Jim returns to the mansion to save Selena and Hannah. After seeing what the soldiers are planning, they lock him away. They try to kill him, but he escapes. But instead of running away, he comes back and goes on a killing spree, essentially. He kills one soldier by gouging his eyes out. He leads an infected they were keeping into the house to kill people, and he slowly picks off everyone else. What's striking in this scene is how much Jim has changed. At the start of the film, Jim is cautious, he's emotional, and he's very lost, and I don't blame him. I don't blame him for that. But now he's calculating, he's violent, and he is relentless. In that moment, he looks more like an infected person rather than a survivor. This scene forces us to confront a difficult idea, that the difference between the infected and the uninfected might not be as clear as we'd like to think. Jim hasn't caught the rage virus, but his actions are filled with rage. He doesn't hesitate, he doesn't reflect. He just does what needs to be done. And obviously this plan does work. He survives, he saves Selena and Hannah, but it leaves the viewer with this weird feeling. Are we supposed to cheer him on, or be scared of the person he's become? Selena's reaction to this makes it even more intense. After Jim kills Major West and turns to her, she almost attacks him because she thinks he's infected. It's only when he stops and he lets her really look at him that she realizes he isn't actually infected. This moment is important because it reminds us that the infected aren't some separate species. They're people. They're still alive, they're still human, but who just lost the ability to control themselves. But Jim, the soldiers, the activists at the start, they all make choices. So when we see Jim become this brutal, unstoppable force, it doesn't just show us what he's willing to do to survive. It also holds up a mirror. Maybe that's the most uncomfortable truth the film unveils. That under the right circumstances, we don't even need a virus to become monsters. 28 Days Later shows us a world where survival forces people to make impossible choices. The infected are driven by rage, but the uninfected often commit cruel acts with full awareness. The film suggests that when people are pushed to the edge, long-term thinking and empathy can just completely disappear. Decisions are made quickly, sometimes with good intentions, but often without considering the consequence. What stays with you after watching isn't just the violence or the fear, or Cillian Murphy's completely naked body lying in that hospital, but the way ordinary people lose all sense of morality when everything else is stripped away.